Good evening, everyone. Looking forward to a very meaningful program tonight. And we're letting people log on, get settled, have a cup of tea with you, feel comfortable, sitting like we would be around a hearth, like a fireside chat. So, welcome, everyone. And we're going to get started in a few minutes. While we're waiting, actually, if people want to put in the chat what town they're from and where they're logging in from, I know we have a really wide representation today. So if people want to just pop in and say hello from their zip code, we're very excited that we have people from. So great. Wow, very exciting. Feel like there's some United States song I should be singing where I learned all the capitals of all the states. We know we're well represented in Atlanta, and we have greetings from Seattle and Florida, from Tennessee and Texas. Some of us are here from Chicago, pulling strong in the Midwest, Massachusetts. Lisa, one of our presenters, is from Baltimore, and she's bringing friends. We have lots of nice areas across Atlanta. Well, this is really nice. And our friends in Oak Park near Chicago. Terrific. I think we'll give it one more quick minute. How does that sound? Is everyone in from our waiting room? We don't want anyone to be. Well, it's really amazing to see everyone here tonight. As you can see on the screen, and we welcome our friends who are watching us on Facebook Live, which is very exciting. We will be recording, and then we'll be able to share this further. My name is Diane Halivni. I'm the coordinator of community education and support at JCFS Chicago. And tonight really started as a brainstorm between Gabby Spat, the amazing executive director of the Blue Dove Foundation, and big snaps and props to Blue Dove and the whole team and the special board members who work to support this incredible effort. So big thank you, Gabby. And this started as a brainstorm really when we were talking about building resources for suicide loss and support. So Gabby came across a set of materials that we had built, and the materials were collaborated upon with these amazing colleagues I have in Chicago. Miriam Ament, founder of No Shame on You, founder and president, and Wendy Dolan, founder of MIST. And you're going to be hearing lots more from both of them in short order. So as we know, tonight's conversation is focused on suicide awareness in the Jewish community. We'll hear from Rabbi Joshua Heller, local Atlanta, shortly about the connections between Judaism and mental health. We will hear an incredible interview by Lisa Zeeb as she interviews Miriam and Wendy. And we'll begin to move the needle and continue these conversations and bring more resources out to the community. So we hope this program will be helpful to you. These are not easy topics to talk about, so we really appreciate that you're with us tonight, and those of us popping in from the internet world. We're just grateful everyone can be here together. I think we will start with Rabbi Heller. Rabbi Heller is the senior rabbi at Congregation B'nai Torah in Atlanta. He speaks and shares often on the topic of mental health and is known for his skills as an inspiring preacher and teacher, his sense of humor, including his high holiday sermon bingo, and his dedication to Jews in need. Welcome, Rabbi Heller. We're looking forward to hearing your thoughts tonight.
Thank you. I'm used to being the main event, but for this cause, I'm actually very happy to be the opening act, so to speak, and to be in support of the Blue Dove Foundation. I had long been in support of the Blue Dove Foundation, and then the day came when I realized that a member of my own family really needed its support, and I appreciate it in a very different way. We're talking tonight about some difficult topics. We're talking about mental health and in particularly suicide. And Judaism is a faith tradition that has at times placed a stigma on suicide. There are questions that will come up. Well, if you commit suicide, can you be buried in a Jewish cemetery? And the truth is we do value life a tremendous amount, and we try to do everything we can to protect life. Unfortunately, some of the things that our tradition has put into place to try to discourage suicide have had the opposite effect of driving awareness of mental illness and mental health issues underground and creating a sense of shame sometimes for things that really deserve the support of the entire community. Because on the flip side, our community really does understand it. Our tradition especially understands the value of mental health. Whenever we say a Misha Berach, a prayer for healing, we talk about Rifuat HaNefesh, healing of the spirit, before we talk about Rifuat HaGuf, healing of the body. Because we understand that healing of the soul must come first, because the body, no matter what we do, is limited by the physical world. The soul is unbounded. And so therefore, when we pray, healing is possible for the soul in ways that it is not possible for the body. Although it's a little bit harder to do that, and our tradition offers some wisdom. We know that some of the most important Jewish figures, some of the most important heroes of our Bible, of our Torah, of our Psalms, wrestled with depression and questions of self-worth. You know, when you read the Psalms, you often think about singing hallelujah. But the truth is, if you read the Psalms, there are many that speak of depression and anxiety. So Psalm 6, my whole soul, my whole being is stricken with disruption, while you, God, how long? God, turn and rescue me, deliver me as befits your faithfulness. For there is no praise of you among the dead. Who can acclaim you in Sheol, in the afterlife? I am weary with groaning. Every night my bed is drenched with tears. My eyes are wasted with sorrow because of my foes. Those are the words of David, a man who had everything. He was a king. He was a hero. And so if David could feel depression and anxiety and despair, who among us doesn't sometimes? You have even Rebecca, who when she sees her family situation says, Lama li chaim, how can I live when I see what is going on in my family? And so our tradition really encourages us. It demands of us that we be aware of the suffering of the souls around us. So there's a story in the Talmud of Tractate Brachot where Rabbi Yochanan comes to visit one of his students who is ill. And he says, you know, you're suffering. How do you feel about your suffering? And Rabbi Chia bar Abba says, I don't really enjoy suffering, in case you were wondering. And so Rabbi Yochanan says, give me your hand. Rabbi Chia bar Abba gives him his hand, and Rabbi Yochanan stands him up and returns him to health. And then the very next paragraph in the Talmud, Rabbi Yochanan himself, who healed Rabbi Chia, himself is feeling illness. Rabbi Chanina enters to visit him and says, how do you feel about your suffering? And he says, I'm not enjoying it. And so Rabbi Chanina says, give me your hand, and lifts him up. And the question the Talmud asks is, well, look, if Rabbi Yochanan is capable of healing the sick, why can't he heal himself? If he healed his student, Rabbi Chia bar Abba, why does he need some other rabbi to heal him? And the answer is that a prisoner cannot free himself from prison. That sometimes we are in a place, we are in a pit, and we need someone else to lift us up. We're reading this week in the Bible, in the Torah, the story of Joseph, who is literally cast into a pit, and he is himself lifted out. One final thought. We are coming up, beginning tomorrow night, we'll be lighting the candles of Hanukkah. And one of the wonderful traditions of Hanukkah is the menorah. We light 8 lights for the 8 nights of Hanukkah, but unless your menorah is defective, it has 9 slots in it for candles. That 9th slot is the shamash. The candle is able to light all of the others. And in fact, if one of those candles goes out, the shamash can be used to relight that candle that has dimmed. So I think as we're having this conversation this evening, we can think about Rabbi Yochanan. Sometimes we ourselves are in the pit and we need to be lifted out. Sometimes we are the ones who can extend a hand to someone else. And the lesson of Hanukkah, the lesson of a shamash, is that each of us has the opportunity to bring light in the darkness. And each of us has a responsibility, I would go so far as to say, to be aware of the light and darkness around us. So we are going to have some important and some difficult conversations, real experts in the field. But what I want to remind us all is that our tradition tells us is that each of us has not only the opportunity, but really the responsibility to raise a hand, to extend a hand, to be aware when someone who is close to us is sitting in darkness, and to do our best to lift them up, to lift them out. That is the lesson of Hanukkah. That is the lesson of the Psalms. That is the lesson of the Talmud. That is the lesson of Judaism, that all of us struggle. All of us fall into darkness at times. All of us have the opportunity to be aware and to be the light that lifts someone else out. And I hope that our conversation this evening really gives us the insight on how to do that, and to be aware that whenever we pray for healing of the body, refuat haguf, that even before that happens, we're praying for refuat hanefesh, that we are looking for the soul to be healed. And that is something that each of us has in our power to do in some small way. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi Heller. It's always a pleasure to learn with you and learn from you. Special people on this panel are the ones who help bring light into the darkness. Lisa Ziv has a passion for supporting parents as they navigate their children's mental health challenges, and she's very involved in building more supportive school communities so we can help all our children and families. She has wonderful reflections on Jewish holidays, traditions, texts that inspire families to cope with these uncertain times. So I recommend that everyone sign up for Lisa's resources, as well as Blue Dove Foundation resources, and certainly No Shame on You and Mist. And we will continue with Lisa and her interview of our 2 very, very special guests tonight, Miriam Ament and Wendy Dolan.
Thank you, Diane. Well, I'm delighted to have the opportunity to first introduce Miriam, and then after the interview with Miriam, we'll have the pleasure of talking with Wendy. Miriam is the founder of No Shame on You, a nonprofit dedicated to eliminating the stigma associated with mental health conditions and raising awareness. Her organization, No Shame on You, the goal is for people who need treatment to seek it, and for family members and friends to know how to provide proper support and to save lives. Miriam is dedicated to utilizing her life experiences with acute depression to normalize mental health conversation and end the stigma. She earned her bachelor's and master's degrees from Columbia University and is the recipient of several awards for mental health advocacy. When I look at Miriam, and you can all see her in the thumbnail on today's webinar, I see courage personified. Over 15 years ago, Miriam, you were hospitalized 3 times for depression and faced stigma and isolation from friends and family members that didn't have the knowledge or the emotional tools to deal with your illness. You could have chosen to quietly fade away and to just deal with your challenges privately, but you didn't. Instead, you founded an organization to help others support and get support for themselves and to provide mental health education. Please share your story with us to help us understand and learn, and ultimately to be more supportive of others.
Sure. Thank you so much for the kind words, Lisa. And I just want to, before I tell my story, I just wanted a big thanks to Blue Dove Foundation and JCFS Chicago for including me. It's such an honor to be here in this program, and to Diane and Gabby, and always an honor to be on a panel with Wendy and Rabbi Heller. So thank you all so much. So yeah, it has been quite a journey to get where I am today. The way it came about is that starting in my teens, I started experiencing what I now know were severe bouts of depression. After high school, I went to Israel for a gap year, which was a great experience, as you can tell by all the pictures of me hanging out with my friends. But what the camera didn't capture were bouts of me nonstop crying and lots of sleepless nights. In hindsight, it's clear that my depression had gotten quite severe. I went to New York after Israel to attend Barnard College. I really liked Barnard. I learned a lot and met some amazing people. But underneath it all, I was still living with depression. It wasn't a bad mood and it wasn't homesickness. As in high school and in Israel, I would have periods of not stop crying. Looking back, it is clear to me what was going on. But at the time, I didn't realize that I needed to get proper treatment. I didn't know that there was a way to get better, to live without the debilitating symptoms of depression. In my 20s, things got progressively worse. I finally sought help in therapy and was prescribed medication, but it wasn't the right therapist, and I wasn't so vigilant about taking my medications, so things kept getting worse. I was living on the Upper West Side of New York at the time, and I felt like I was the only one of my friends who was still single. They were either married, engaged, or dating someone, so I started to feel more and more alone and more hopeless. The despair seemed to have no end date. It just went on and on. A friend of mine who was a doctor suggested that I go to the hospital. And I should note that the first time I went to the hospital was on Oscars night, the historic night that Halle Berry won her Oscar. I've always been a big fan of entertainment and pop culture. So my willingness to go to the hospital that night, the realization that I couldn't sit and focus on one of my all-time favorite nights and was completely consumed by loneliness, hopelessness, and despondency was truly a reflection of how tough a place I was in. I was hospitalized twice, and because of the stigma surrounding mental health, I didn't want too many people to know, just a few friends and family members. And even those few were too many, as it turned out. One of my then closest friends from childhood called me when I was in the hospital for my second hospitalization and said, "I only want to talk to you when you're happy, so let's not talk again for a while." And then I never heard from her again. I was already feeling so isolated, and this friend's response completely broke me and ended up extending my hospital stay. If someone I considered a close friend would stop talking to me, what would other people think? From then on, I kept my hospitalizations a secret. The only person I told was the man who is now my husband. I was hospitalized a third time. I was so depressed, experiencing suicidal ideation and so much loneliness. I was in my early 30s and was completely lost in so much pain and felt completely hopeless. After that third hospitalization, I got really serious about my well-being. After meeting with a few therapists, I found the right therapist for me, and I was also vigilant about my medication, making sure to take it consistently at the same time every day. And I want to note here that it's important to note that it can sometimes take a while to find the right therapist, and it took me a very long while, but just like with a doctor, if you get a second opinion and sometimes a third opinion, it's okay to make sure to find the right fit, and that's what I had to do. So circling back, I was back in Chicago, working at a law firm and married, and things were going well. I was finally on track, but I still had this deep, dark secret that I rarely spoke about, even with the few people who knew what it was. And then 10 years after my last hospitalization, I won a charity auction and found myself sitting at lunch across the table from the actress Glenn Close. I knew she was a big advocate of mental health awareness because of her sister, and I ended up telling her my whole story. And that was a first. Not only was she a stranger, but she was the legendary actress Glenn Close. And it was transformative. Sharing my story was really a breakthrough. And I started to realize that I could turn what I thought was such a negative aspect of my life into something positive and really have an impact on other people. So I started doing some research and I learned how common mental illness is. And according to research, one of the best ways to eradicate mental health stigma is for people to have contact with an individual living with a mental health condition. So knowing all of this, the startling numbers of people living with mental health conditions, and realizing that opening up about my story could help others, I decided to make a career change and devote myself full-time to mental health awareness and start No Shame on You. And I should add that if you had told me 15 years ago that I'd be open about my mental health journey and running a mental health organization, I never would have believed you. And I want to end by saying that there is hope and light for you or anyone you know living with a mental health condition, and I'm an example of that hope. So thank you for allowing me to share my story.
Well, Miriam, it's an incredible story, and more so than the story is really what you're doing with your life story and empowering others to learn from your story and to have a higher quality of life. So thank you from all of us. One thing Miriam's group, No Shame on You, does, and they do it in such a great way. They have managed, or Miriam and her organization has managed to have 110,000 social media followers. And that's pretty incredible. So I'd like for you to tell us a little bit about how do you attract attention to your cause, and what perhaps is unique to No Shame on You that you do to promote your mission.
So I think the way we attract attention, and I think what's unique about us, is that we sort of have a multi-pronged approach to normalizing the mental health conversation. So we have regularly occurring programs, classes, and workshops. We also have a weekly blog. We have a podcast, and our latest one was just posted last night about teen suicide prevention. And pre-pandemic, we would go to fairs, parades, and festivals, distributing resources and doing things like marching in the Skokie 4th of July parade 4 years in a row with a big banner, a place you wouldn't necessarily expect to see a group promoting normalizing the mental health conversation. So we try to have a big approach. And then I think doing all of that led to us having this large online presence. And with our online presence, we share tools and articles daily to reach some of the many people who might not be as comfortable attending an event, but still want connection and to not feel alone. So I think through the many different ways we try to reach out to people, we've ended up attracting a large community.
Terrific. Thank you. And I want to touch on your point about the pandemic. I think one of the silver linings of COVID is that mental health has become much more accepted as a topic of conversation these days. You could even say that it's trendy to talk about depression during the pandemic. So can you talk to us, please, a little bit about what you're seeing and how your organization is helping people during these uncertain times?
Sure, absolutely. So at the beginning of the pandemic, No Shame on You realized that we would have to be adaptable in order to provide mental health support to the community.
Sure.
And the programming needs became bigger and bigger as we saw the response we were getting, and that the mental health needs of everyone, were growing and growing. So we aim to start providing programming which reduced COVID's impact on feelings of isolation, anxiety, and sadness, which help people cope with the losses they were experiencing, such as family get-togethers and school activities. We also look to offer anchoring programs for these times. And since the pandemic, we have held over 110 virtual programs for the community at no charge. So while we are a small organization, we're grateful that we've been able to maximize our impact during these unique and challenging times by offering programs such as weekly yoga with a special focus on mental well-being and mindfulness, support groups, understanding mental health sessions, teen check-ins. We launched an art challenge for kindergarten through seniors, and we're implementing our first ever teen ambassador program, to just name a few.
Terrific. Thank you. I'd like to get your thoughts on what you'd like to see, particularly the Jewish community, do to be more supportive. We know that the topic of mental health in general is one has been not as talked about as some other topics in the Jewish community, but through your organization and other organizations and just work and awareness, it is getting talked about more. What do you have some ideas to help the Jewish community be more specific, be more supportive?
Sure. So I think one example is when someone is going through a sickness or has a family member who's sick, or they themselves are getting some treatment for a physical condition, there's often Take Them a Meal is done by the community, that there's a website or it's organized by the community so that every night dinner is provided by friends and family from the community. And oftentimes when people have a family member with a mental health condition, or if they themselves are living with a mental health condition, they don't hear from anyone. I have a friend whose son was hospitalized for many months for a mental health condition. Most of her friends knew, and people didn't reach out to her at all, let alone providing meals. They didn't know what to do, so they just didn't reach out to her, and they just didn't talk to her. And I think really what we should think about is that a mental health condition or a severe mental health condition should be no different than if someone was getting treatment for, God forbid, cancer or something else. And if we as a community can provide the support that we would do for any other severe condition, that would go a long way for the family feeling supported, the individual feeling supported, and people getting the strength and comfort from their community.
That's terrific. Yeah, I think it would be so empowering and so helpful if the community treated mental health issues and mental health diagnoses, and did acts of chesed and charity, and things to help, just like they do in other times of physical health crisis. So I think that's something we're all working on, and there's definitely room for that. So thank you. I'd like to focus in a little bit about the topic of suicide. I know this is an uncomfortable subject for many people. Often itself, the word is only whispered, kind of like the word cancer was, some people would call it the C word years ago. They didn't even want to say it for fear that it might be contagious. Personally, I had to learn to get comfortable with the topic when my teenage daughter had suicidal thoughts every day, sometimes several times a day for a year. I'd like to get your perspective on if it's okay to ask somebody directly if they're having suicidal thoughts. Some people think that if you ask somebody about suicide, it may make them think about it more often. So what's your perspective on that topic? And then also, can you kind of coach us a little bit about some phrases or some words that family or friends could use when they're talking to somebody who might be thinking about suicide?
Sure. And thank you for sharing your journey with us too, because by sharing, it's having an impact on so many people. So thank you. So in answer to your question, it is actually a myth that talking about suicide may give someone the idea. In fact, you not only don't give a suicidal person ideas by talking about suicide, but the opposite is in fact true. And research shows that bringing up the subject of suicide and discussing it openly is actually one of the most helpful things you can do. And ways to start that conversation, because it's a tricky conversation, is to say things like, I've noticed something specific about a time or a place where you weren't themselves. Something like, I've noticed a change in your mood, or I've noticed you've had less patience recently, or you're showing more irritable, you seem more irritable lately. And by trying to start with, I've noticed this, that kind of opens up the conversation. And then together with that, asking open-ended conversations to get the going. Questions like, I'd like to understand more about what you're going through. Could you tell me more? Is an additional way to kind of start that conversation. And instead of asking yes or no questions, sort of understand more and try to get the person talking. And then, excuse me, and then when you want to take it further to ask directly about suicide, it's important to frame the conversation with empathy and compassion. So saying things like, sometimes when people are going through something tough, they find themselves in unimaginable pain. And they think things like, I wish I could go to bed and just not wake up because their pain is so excessive. Or you could say something like, sometimes when emotional pain is so intense, people think about suicide. I'm wondering how many times suicide might have crossed your mind, or if it's just fleeting in nature. While those are tough ways to phrase it, they can be a gentle but effective way to open up the conversation and assess where the person is in terms of their suicidal ideation.
Thank you. That's great information. Thank you. Thank God. I'm happy to say that your story thus far, I hope it would continue. Your story has a happy ending. You're now happily married and sharing your mental health experience in order to help others. In many communities, in particular the Jewish community, people choose to keep their mental health challenges quiet. And especially when it involves a young person, one of the frequent concerns and reasons why they say they keep it quiet is because they're concerned about marriage prospects. So I'm curious if your history of depression impacted any of your dating options, or how that factored into maybe other people in cases you've talked about with No Shame on You, or to share your personal story.
Sure. So in my case, I made sure to tell my husband fairly early on in our courtship about my mental health journey. Obviously, because of how my friend reacted when I was hospitalized that I mentioned earlier, telling me and other people she wanted nothing to do with me since I had a mental health condition, I was very nervous to share with my husband, my then boyfriend. But I also knew it was essential to our relationship and my husband, that my husband understand what I had been through. And part of what No Shame on You is trying to do, as I touched on earlier, is sort of reframe the conversation in general, so that just as you would share with a romantic partner that you had a condition like diabetes, sharing a mental health condition should really be looked at in the same way. It's something that needs to be monitored. It's something you need to watch, but it shouldn't necessarily change your relationship in the same way. If someone lived with diabetes, you would act accordingly and buy certain foods and not make other foods and whatever else that would mean. I think it's an important thing to reframe. And we've actually done programs on mental health and dating and all that kind of stuff, because it is a very tricky conversation. But it's important because there are stories of people who go into marriages without sharing, and then that can have its own consequences. So I think trying to think about it more like any other condition can be helpful.
Terrific. Thank you for that advice. And our last question, I'd like to get your recommendations and thoughts on how other communities outside of Chicago can take lessons learned from No Shame on You and help to normalize the conversation about mental health and end the stigma in their communities.
So I think one thing that I've learned is that you can have impact on, you never know the impact you can have on people by just letting them know that they're not alone and that you understand. And that even by reaching one person through marketing a program or providing support or doing a program in your community, you're doing really well by even reaching just one person, because by impacting even one person, you can in turn reach countless people. So many people I have connected with in the last few years were from one person telling another about No Shame on You and the work that we do, and thinking this person might benefit. And then that person told another person. And I think it's just sort of, sometimes it's a slow, it can take time, but I think every community doing a program like this, and every community doing things slowly but surely, you're spreading the message and raising awareness and getting people to help and letting people know they're not alone. So the impact you can have, whether you're reaching one or hundreds or even thousands, it makes a big difference.
Terrific. Well, kol hakavod to all what you're doing, and thank you so much for sharing your story with us and sharing your wisdom with us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here.
Okay, thank you. Diane, should I move on to our next interview?
I actually am going to insert
Great, thank you.
a pause for a moment. In the book of Mishlei, Proverbs, we read, Ner Hashem meets Nishmat Adam. The human spirit is the lamp of God, searching for self-understanding. And as we've said, this is not an easy topic, and we wanted to acknowledge that if you are on this program and you yourself are struggling with questions of suicide, or if you have lost someone to suicide, we want to just openly extend our support, our condolences, and that often friends and family don't get enough support. And that's really been one of the inspirations of the work that Miriam and Wendy and JCFS Chicago have done. We'll talk a little bit more later about our resources, but we just want to acknowledge the specialness, uniqueness, and hold people in their deep feelings of this experience. So with part 2. Thanks, Lisa and Wendy.
Pleasure. Thank you. I have the pleasure now of introducing Wendy Dolan. Wendy is an advocate and educator working to raise awareness of medication-induced suicide. She is the champion of akathisia, a disorder that the general public and medical professionals know very little about. This lack of knowledge has tragically resulted in akathisia sufferers taking their own lives and leaving behind devastated loved ones. Upon the death of her husband in 2010, Wendy started the nonprofit MIST, the Medication-Induced Suicide Prevention and Education Foundation, in memory of Stuart Dolan. MIST aims to ensure that people suffering from akathisia symptoms are accurately diagnosed so that needless deaths are prevented. In October of 2018, the International Society of Ethical Psychiatry and Psychology voted Wendy Humanitarian of the Year. I'm pleased to welcome Wendy to teach us about how akathisia and how the Jewish community can provide support to those who've been affected by this disorder. Wendy, I'm so impressed that you've turned your personal pain from the death of your husband into a mission to educate and advocate for drug safety and awareness in Stuart's memory. Please share your story to help us learn ways that we can understand the potentially lethal medical side effects.
Again, thank you all for having me tonight. What an honor to be among so many wonderful people. So in July, in probably late summer of, or late spring of 2010, Stuart had some situational anxiety associated with work. No history of mental illness, no debt, two totally launched children, and we had been high school sweethearts and at that time knew each other for 42 years. So he was experiencing some stress at work and he decided to get an antidepressant, go on an antidepressant. And 6 days later, after I call it this crescendo of symptoms that occurred during the week, after having a business lunch with a client where he had a chicken salad with a dressing on the side. And I don't know about you, but if I'm ending my life in an hour, I'm not having the dressing on the side. It became sort of our family thoughts on that. He made forward thinking plans with the accountant for next week, gets up from his desk at work, walks to a train station he never would have gone to, and ended his life by suicide 6 days after starting this medication. And this was a total shock to anyone who know him. And I know that when someone ends their life by suicide, people will say, yo, well, you didn't really know them. But this was simply something that was just out of the blue. And everybody was so dumbfounded, including me. And about a month after Stuart died, one of my girlfriends called me and said the word akathisia. And most people didn't know how to spell it or pronounce it. And I ended up that night doing some research of Paxil, suicide, and akathisia. And lo and behold, this whole world of information came out there that akathisia is an underreported drug side effect. And what was so obviously disturbing to me is that when people end their life because of akathisia, it's not so much that they want to end their life. It's that they want to end the pain and suffering of the drug side effect. And things such as, I feel like my head is on fire, bugs are crawling on me, and there's this inner and external turmoil. And when I realized that this is out there and nobody knows about it, it became my life's mission to start this organization. And let's face it, you say to people, wait a minute, you're starting an organization for medication-induced suicide? What are the chances of this kind of an organization succeeding? But as it turns out, lots of people have experienced this and didn't know there was a name for it. So basically, the definition of akathisia is, it is a drug side effect that can cause a person such internal pain and agony that the sufferer is driven to violence, self-harm, and suicide. And I started doing, when we first started working with MIST, because Stuart had been on an SSRI, our organization primarily focused just on SSRIs and awareness with antidepressants, antipsychotics. But as we started to develop this international presence, we were finding out that this was occurring with many different classes of medication, the malaria drugs, Accutane, the antiemetics people take for cancer, the list went on and on. So we kind of changed our life-saving message to this: when you stop, start, or change the dosage of any medication, no matter what it's for, if you start to even get worsening symptoms or symptoms that weren't there originally, you need to call your doctor or call 911. So MIST has ended up being known as a internationally recognized drug safety advocacy group. And it's my life mission to spread it all over the world, this mission.
Thank you, Wendy. So I'm curious, because most of us on this webinar tonight, we know that prescription drugs have been life-saving for so many individuals struggling, especially with mental health issues. So is MIST anti-drug? What's your position on that?
Oh, I speak on this all the time. Never anti-drug. When Stuart died, I couldn't have lived without some of the medications that I had personally been placed on. All we're about simply is about awareness. I mean, we don't scare anyone. I'm a social worker by profession. If I feel that someone is struggling, I say to them, why don't you see about medication? But it's not anti-drug. We're for full transparency and full disclosure. I mean, that's, so and I think that because our message, who hasn't taken medications, who hasn't had a side effect, that I think people can have really welcomed and embraced this message. And I think because we're not anti-drug, it's something, and we're not anti-doctors either, we are able to get people to listen and to learn. And it's interesting because we have something, shared at MIST, and you get letters from all over the world. Thank you for what you're doing. This happened to me. This happened to a loved one. So I think we've now been associated with a safe patient. It's a safe patient organization.
Okay, thank you. So you talked about awareness. What are some of the signs that a family member or a friend should be on the lookout for when concerning the medication side effects or an increased risk of suicide?
First of all, I think that's the great question. And this is something that I think is so important. First of all, as a given, I say to people when I speak, have a buddy system. If you or someone you know is starting a new medication, let somebody know. Let somebody know that you're starting something or going off of that. And I think that for me, I guess it's really plain and simple, as I stated earlier, that yes, there's specific internal and external symptoms of akathisia. External: tapping, pacing, marching back and forth. The internal symptoms, which are harder to gravitate, people talk about cognitive confusion. Again, your brain's on fire, you're disoriented. And basically what I say, that if you know someone who's starting or stopping or change the dosage of a medication and they start acting differently, they start, expressing things differently, or they're regressing, or what they have new symptoms that were there, then you need to be aware. And it doesn't matter what it is. My mother, who's 77 years old, lived in a nursing home, and they gave her Ritalin to make her eat more, and she started having psychotic symptoms, and nobody knew what it was from. And she ended up having a detox at 85 years old in a mental ward in a hospital. So it's just a question of awareness. That's all it is. Just like you look both ways, but when you cross the street, you look both ways and you think about what you're putting in your body. It's a simple, safe patient message.
That's great advice. Thank you. I want to say that in preparing for today's interview, I went to your website and I took the 1 hour class on Akathisia 101. It's a course that you can take because honestly, I never heard the word. I still have trouble pronouncing it now. So spelling, please don't test me on that. But when I watched the webinar and took the training, it really was a chilling moment for me. I'm the mother of 2 children with mental health diagnoses and therefore responsible for their therapy appointments and their medications. And I immediately thought when I watched the training about my 15-year-old daughter who was prescribed SSRIs for depression. And she had just thought was a regular side effect. She was shaking everywhere for a couple of days. She was shaking so bad, like muscle spasms, that she couldn't safely walk down the stairs. And she just wanted to sleep because even her tongue was shaking like a vibrating machine. So I called the doctor, and the doctor recommended that we take her to the emergency room, thinking maybe she was just simply having a drug reaction. So we did that, and she was at that point in a partial hospitalization program, and they had been changing her medication 3 times in 5 days. 3 times in 5 days. And at no point, either during the partial hospitalization program or in the emergency room, did anybody tell me about the increased risk of suicide or this condition that we should be aware of. So why is it that so few people know about akathisia?
Well, here's my theory and about this is that it really, and again, I'm not a fan of big pharma necessarily, but this is what, my journey has made me realize that drug companies give the FDA their drug trials. And we are at the mercy of what the drug companies give to the FDA. And akathisia is a word that they're aware of, but it's always been associated usually with violence, self-harm, and suicide. So they don't code it right. They'll say someone had emotional lability, or they'll say someone was a little confused. I'm sorry, jumping in front of a train is not emotional lability. You know, that's more than that. So consequently, the drug companies haven't informed the FDA correctly. And then there's something called the Dear Doctor letter. And all new medications that come to market, the doctors receive something that's known as a Dear Doctor letter. And in the case of, you know, it was actually Stuart's dearest friend who prescribed it. We had a copy of the Dear Doctor letter that they sent about Paxil, which basically said, oh, it's an excess things in white bread for reducing suicidal ideation. But lo and behold, there was an 800% increase of suicide on Paxil, and they didn't feel that this was a significant statistic to report to people. So I think we're just not getting informed from the manufacturers. We're not, and then the doctors are not informed either. Now, I'm not saying doctors don't make bad prescribing, you know, problems, but when it's come to akathisia, they don't know about it. Like, it was interesting. I had the pleasure, not this summer, but a year ago, to speak to the Royal College of Psychiatrists in London because they knew the work that I was doing on akathisia. And they said, why do you know more than we do? And I said, well, you know, and so it's sort of this movement of awareness. And I think that that's the reason they don't know about it. But I think that we as consumers need to ask better questions, or if we see within ourselves things you're not quite right, it may not be you.
Great.
It may not be you, and you need to let someone know.
Thank you. And so my last question I have for you is, it seems like there's been a lot of progress and you've helped to raise awareness. How can we hold doctors and psychiatrists accountable to help inform patients and their caregivers that there is or there could be an increased risk in suicide?
I think that, you know, I mean, that's a great question. I wish I had a more definitive answer. I mean, if they could get more information, I think that there would be greater awareness. But I think it's happening. Like, you know, one of the things that MIST does is we spend a lot of time and resources on educational materials. Like, we have two videos on our website that explain akathisia. We have like 225,000 views, and we have recently we've had train campaigns in New York and Chicago where we put signs and symptoms of akathisia. And our most recent thing, it just happened last month, is on San Francisco, near the San Francisco, you know, the Golden Gate Bridge. We have buses that are wraparound buses that say, do you know what akathisia is? So we go to conferences, and we specifically go to conferences where there's doctors. But I'm saying that it's getting out there. Let me put it this way. It's getting out there. But again, it's up to us. Like, if you go to your doctor and say, you know, have you heard of akathisia, you know, and educate them as well as yourselves.
Well, thank you, Wendy. I really appreciate that. I know I've learned a lot from you tonight, and I think everybody else has too. So thanks for shining a light on this issue.
And one last thing, it's just that what MIST feels very strongly about is the majority of people that end their life by suicide have had mental health conditions, and they've had, you know, situations that they can't handle. But this is about a 10% risk. And for the 10% of those people that take medications in our country, this needs to be, in my opinion, something that even should be on a suicide awareness hotline. Like, in other words, have you recently stopped or started to change the dosage of a medication? Because, you know, 10% is 10%, and, you know, 1%, it was my loved one, and that's enough. You know, it doesn't matter how many millions. For those who have been impacted, why shouldn't we get the word out? And so I think that what MIST has done is broadened the suicide conversation.
Thank you.
So as you might imagine, it has been my pleasure this past year or so to work with Wendy and Miriam in our partnership based in Chicago, but obviously with national impact, to bring more suicide awareness to the Jewish community. Thank you all to all of the presenters who have spoken in such a heartfelt way to give us knowledge which can empower us to seek help, to reach out, to ask questions, and to ask for help ourselves, which sometimes I think is a big part of what we wrestle with when we're not sure how to do that. So in one of a piece of writing, a blog post, JCFS Chicago posted in September acknowledging Suicide Prevention Month, we made a big push to ask everyone to put the National Suicide Lifeline in their phones so that you have it there in the event of an emergency. And you can call the national line and they link you to local resources and you tell them where they are. Sometimes you have to wait for like a minute or two, but they do come to the line and they are a tremendous resource. So if we do nothing else, one takeaway is please ask your friends and family to put this number. You just never know. And if we're really doing Wendy's message, we should call the Lifeline and tell them they have to add some questions about akathisia. So we could do that too. For those of you on our Zoom, you will be receiving an email in your inbox, or I think it already just popped in, with resources that connect you to the No Shame on You website and other information about signs and symptoms of depression and what to look for. Wendy's website is listed and there's a link right there. So if anyone wants to take the 1-hour CEU to learn more about the signs and symptoms of akathisia, that will be there. And one of the pieces of the work that was the original inspiration for my conversation with Gabby early on was that JCFS Chicago, MIST, and No Shame on You designed a suicide loss brochure. And, you know, Wendy and Miriam have tremendous knowledge, resource, and sadly personal experience. But what we created has actually already helped so many people. And it gives us the language and the tools to talk about something that's really, really hard to talk about. So if anybody does wish for actually hard copies, does anybody use hard copies of things anymore? We can mail out to you hard copies of a lot of our resources. So just be in touch with us. And of course, there'll be many links to lots of resources. And I hope everyone will take some time to read through things and follow up with us and share feedback, because we always want to learn more and do more and respond to questions and comments, which unfortunately we do not have enough time to do tonight. But I know I will stay on for a little bit extra to hang out briefly if Gabby lets me. Really just a tremendous thanks to the Blue Dove Foundation for convening us all together in this way. And, you know, it's an honor to do this work and be connected. So in closing, I would like to first wish everyone a happy Hanukkah. And Rabbi, when you talked about being the light and being the shamash, you know, sometimes we're a flickering candle and we need help from a shamash, and sometimes we can be more of a strong, bright presence for others. So with that in mind, I would like to close with this beautiful Misha Berach for mental health. That was a piece of writing that came out of the Blue Dove Foundation team. So thank you very much to them. And I will close with this Misha Berach. May the one who blessed our ancestors, who named us Israel, Yisrael, those who struggle, bless and heal those among us who struggle with mental well-being. May the Holy One grant us strength and resilience to support ourselves and our loved ones. May we find the patience and forgiveness we need for ourselves and others. May we find solidarity and support from other caregivers. May we find the capacity to listen without judgment and with the intention to help when asked. May we find the ability to notice when others might be struggling and to reach out to them first. And may we create communities that accept, uplift, and celebrate those among us who are struggling. Thank you again to everyone for being with us tonight. We look forward to staying in touch with you, and may you all have a very bright and beautiful Hanukkah.